Story 1. The Cabin in the Frozen Valley. During the relentless winter of 1984, three friends, Lucas, Rodrigo, and Amanda, decided to retreat from the world to Lucas's grandfather's old cabin, located in the remote mountains of southern Brazil. The grandfather had passed away recently, and the cabin, with its rustic structure smelling of aged wood and soot, seemed like the perfect refuge from urban chaos. But as night fell, they discovered they were not alone in that frozen expanse. On the first night, as they gathered around a makeshift bonfire, a piercing sound echoed through the forest. It was a scream, long, irregular, almost human, but disturbingly distorted. Amanda froze, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Lucas, trying to appear brave, suggested investigating. Armed with weak flashlights, they ventured into the darkness, but found only silent trees and the howling wind. However, upon returning, they noticed strange marks in the snow. Human footprints surrounded the cabin, but some inexplicably vanished, in untouched patches of snow, as if the person had floated. The next day, while gathering firewood in the nearby valley, they stumbled upon a macabre scene. A rabbit hung from low branches with wires. Its body was split open with precise, almost surgical cuts, and its blood formed strange patterns on the ice below. The forest's silence felt suffocating, broken only by occasional creaks and rustling. Amanda insisted they leave immediately, but Lucas accused her of overreacting. "It's just a dead animal," he said, masking his own unease. But the precise cut suggested this was no predator's work. The third night brought true horror. Rodrigo woke abruptly, hearing claws scratching against the cabin door. Heart pounding, he peered through the window and saw something that froze his blood. A hooded figure stood in the snow, motionless, its face obscured by shadows. Yet its eyes, or what appeared to be eyes, glowed an unsettling red. He tried to scream for his friends, but his voice failed him. When he finally managed to wake them, the figure had vanished, leaving deep footprints leading into the woods and disappearing into the darkness. At dawn, they decided to abandon the cabin immediately. Terror cloaked them like an invisible shroud. However, when they reached the spot where they had parked the car, they found it destroyed. The roof had been crushed, as though something massive had smashed it. With no other choice, they began descending the trail on foot, battling the biting cold. All the while, they could hear heavy footsteps following them. Every time they stopped, the sounds stopped too. But the oppressive sensation of being watched suffocated them. At last, they reached the town, exhausted, injured, and in shock. For weeks, they avoided any mention of the events. Months later, a news report struck them like a blow. The cabin had been destroyed in a mysterious fire. Authorities found no traces of what could have caused it. Lucas, Rodrigo, and Amanda never returned to that mountain, and to this day they dare not speak of the terrifying nights they spent in the frozen valley. Some say something was watching them, something ancient and hungry, which never truly let them escape. Story 2. The Man in the Ice Lake Inn. The 1960s, a small village hidden among the icy peaks of the French Alps, was consumed by a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. It was the harshest winter ever recorded, and the heavy silence of the snow seemed to conceal something sinister. It was in this frozen setting that a group of villagers made a discovery that would forever haunt the area. A frozen lake with a human figure trapped beneath the surface. It was a man. He was frozen in a twisted position, his eyes wide open and his mouth agape, as if caught in the grip of an unimaginable terror at the moment of his death. His clothing was entirely unsuited for the extreme cold, suggesting he wasn't from the area. The news spread quickly, and the body was carefully removed from the ice and taken to the local station. There were no documents, personal items, or any clues to identify him or explain how he had ended up there. When the coroner performed the autopsy, the mystery deepened. The cause of death was confirmed as hypothermia, which was expected in such a harsh environment. However, there was something unusual. The ice surrounding the body was stained a deep red, as if blood had seeped into it. Yet, there were no visible wounds on the corpse to account for this. The coroner, a seasoned professional, was disturbed. Nothing in his career had prepared him for this. That very night, while the village tried to make sense of the events, a couple living near the lake reported seeing a figure walking in the snow. They swore it was a man wearing the same clothes as the frozen body, but he vanished before they could approach. The next morning, fresh footprints were discovered in the snow. They began at the lake and stopped right at the couple's front door, as if the visitor had stood there, watching, before disappearing again. In the days that followed, the situation became even more unsettling. Strange sounds began to echo through the village at night, loud cracks like ice breaking, and muffled wails that seemed to come from the depths of the lake. Some villagers claimed to hear screams, not the kind carried by animals or the wind, but distinctly human cries filled with despair. Many said they felt a presence near the lake, a coldness that penetrated deeper than the winter air, as if something unnatural was lurking there. The atmosphere in the village became unbearable. The more superstitious residents believed that something evil had been unleashed when the body was removed. One by one, the villagers began abandoning their homes, leaving the area nearly deserted by the end of the winter. Only the bravest or the most stubborn remained, but even they avoided venturing near the lake. When spring finally arrived and the ice began to thaw, the village was dealt one final horrific blow. As the lake melted, another body emerged. This time, it was a woman, frozen in the same expression of absolute terror. The most haunting detail was her posture. It suggested she had been trying to escape something, her hands stretched toward the surface as if fighting for her life until the very end. After that, the village was almost entirely abandoned. The area gained a reputation for being cursed, and those few who dare to visit today claim that on cold nights they can still hear the cracking of ice and distant cries of despair. Many avoid even speaking of the lake, as if mentioning it could bring something back. The mystery endures, haunting those who know it, and the man in the frozen lake remains one of the most chilling stories of the region. Story 3. The Silent Road Inn. The early 2000s, a family decided to brave the harsh Canadian winter to spend Christmas with relatives in a distant town. The journey was long and the chosen route even longer. They opted for an isolated road in northern Canada, surrounded by dense forests and snow-covered mountains, trusting their GPS to guide them. Little did they know that this detour would lead them into something far more sinister than unpredictable snowstorms. The snow fell heavily and relentlessly, engulfing the road and erasing any sense of direction. With visibility near zero, the car lost traction on a steep section and became stuck in the treacherous ice. Completely isolated, with no cell signal and no clue where they were, the family decided to spend the night in the car, hoping the storm would ease by morning. Around 2 a.m, the silence outside was broken by the soft voice of Emily, the youngest daughter, who stared wide-eyed out the window. "There's a woman out there," she whispered. Her parents, exhausted and tense, exchanged quick glances and looked in the same direction. But all they saw was the empty, snowy expanse, with flakes swirling in the wind. They tried to calm her, assuring her it was just her imagination or a shadow. Moments later, a faint knock on the rear of the car shattered the uneasy quiet. The father, nervous but trying to maintain composure, grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. The biting wind and endless white were all he found. Yet upon returning to the car, something froze him more than the frigid air. Handprints on the rear window. Small, delicate handprints like those of a child. The rest of the night was a torment of fear and unease. But finally, the grey morning light began to break through. They decided to abandon the car and walk in search of help. Each step through the forest felt heavier, the silence around them oppressive, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the snow. After hours of walking, they spotted a cabin hidden among the trees. It was a relief, a sign of shelter. However, stepping inside revealed an atmosphere steeped in darkness. The cabin was filled with old toys, scattered chaotically, and black and white photographs of children adorned the walls. The images were unsettling. The children in the photos wore somber, almost lifeless expressions, as if their joy had been drained away. Emily, drawn to a stuffed bear, picked it up. The moment she held it, she let out a terrified scream and dropped it to the floor. "She said I'm going to stay here with her too," she sobbed, while her parents tried to calm her, their own terror tightening like a noose around their throats. They didn't stay a second longer. Fleeing the cabin, the suffocating feeling of being watched followed them with every step. Eventually, they were found by a truck driver passing along the main road. Exhausted and shaken, they recounted the incident and described the cabin to the local authorities. The response was chilling. There was no record of any structure in that area for over 50 years. However, their description matched old stories of a house that had burned down long ago. It was said that before the fire, the house had been home to a woman and several adopted children, though the details of their fate remained shrouded in mystery. The family never spoke of the incident again, but the trauma lingered. Years later, Emily confided in a friend that during the harshest winters, she could still hear a woman's voice calling her name, persistent and soft, like a summons that would never cease. The road still lies there, buried in snow, waiting for the next soul brave enough or unlucky enough to lose their way in its treacherous paths.